Now we're going to get to New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman. The Pulitzer Prize winner is here for her first live interview about her new book, Confidence Man, The Making of Donald Trump and the Breaking of America. We're going to speak with her after this report from senior national correspondent Terry Moran. Good morning, Terry.
Good morning, George. Maggie Haberman is one of those journalists Donald Trump just couldn't seem to quit. He lambasted her over the years, but he also never stopped talking to her. And her new book is a product of her access and her insight. She's been dubbed the Trump Whisperer for her access to the former president. And now in her new book, Maggie Haberman, New York Times senior political reporter, has written a biography of Donald Trump, Confidence Man, which dives deep into the inner workings of the Trump administration and what motivated him during his 4 years in office. Haberman has been covering Donald Trump for the better part of 2 decades as a journalist in New York City, long before his presidency. And while he's frequently targeted her,
she's a third-rate reporter, a terrible, dishonest reporter. She's fake.
Trump has also opened up to Haberman.
Maggie Haberman was very fair.
At one point saying she was like my psychiatrist. For her latest book, Haberman interviewed hundreds of sources, as well as the former president himself, and she delivers eye-popping details about the Trump presidency. Haberman writes that during Trump's time in the White House, he once floated the idea of firing his daughter Ivanka and his son-in-law Jared Kushner, who served as White House advisors, in a tweet before his then chief of staff John Kelly stopped him. The book also recounts an incident that may reflect on the former president's views of race and culture, alleging Trump once saw a racially diverse group of staffers during a White House reception and assumed they were waiters, asking them to, quote, get some trays of hors d'oeuvres. Haberman also writes that the former president once asked his staff about an idea to bomb Mexican drug labs to curb the flow of drugs across the border and into America. And in one of the more stunning allegations, Haberman writes that after losing the 2020 presidential election, Trump apparently told aides that he was just not going to leave the White House and purportedly said, "How can you leave when you won an election?" Trump also denies bringing classified documents to his Florida estate when he eventually did leave office, telling Haberman this summer that he hadn't taken any materials of great urgency with him in one of 3 interviews for this book. It comes as no surprise that Donald Trump is blasting this book as fake, despite those several one-on-one conversations with Maggie Haberman. George?
Terry Moran, thanks. Maggie Haberman is here right now. Congratulations on the book, Maggie. We just saw Terry talk about some of the scoops. One of the other things about this book, you've been covering Donald Trump for a long time, more than 20 years, and you say the key to understanding Donald Trump is understanding where he comes from.
That's exactly right. And the goal of this book, George, is to paint a deeper portrait, something more complex, something that explains the world he came from and how much that informed the White House, and now how much that informs our politics and the Republican Party and what that looks like going forward.
There's so much to talk about in the book, but I want to get to what Terry said right at the top. Donald Trump just can't quit you. You probably can't count the number of times you've interviewed him. We saw him attack you. We saw him praise you. Yet he keeps on coming back. Do you know why?
Well, let's see if that happens again.
He hasn't talked to you since the book came out?
No, I haven't spoken to him since I reported that he was flushing documents down the toilet earlier this year. That was also in the book, so that when he was in the White House. I think it's just his compulsion about, number one, the New York Times, which he is obsessed with. And that just goes back decades to his days in New York, number one. And I think he just associates me with the Times as the reporter who has covered him most. But I also just think it is about his desire to get attention, George. It is just, one of the things I explore in the book is just how driven he is by the need for attention. So much of what he does, including running for president, is about getting attention, and I think that is it.
Not surprising. He's issued a string of denials since your book came out, including what you report about his plans to fire Ivanka and Jared. He says it's not true.
Well, I stand by my reporting, number one, and number two, I'm a little surprised that is, I'm not surprised in the sense that he always gets very concerned about things related to his family, who he had working in the White House, and therefore they became more of a focus. But he was talking about having them leave the White House for a very long time. So it's fine that he's talking about saying that this isn't true, but we've reported aspects of this before.
He also denied to you that he took documents out of the White House, but there's an exchange you have with him over those letters from Kim Jong-un that seems to be an admission.
It was hard to know exactly what he was saying, George. It was vague, and it was sort of the classic Donald Trump moment that I think we have all seen over time. He starts out with the quick denial, where I asked him on a lark, did you take documents? Just knowing how proud he was of things like the Kim Jong-un letters. And he said nothing of great urgency, no. And then he volunteers something about the Kim Jong-un letters. Hard to know what he was saying. And I said, you took those with you, or you were allowed to take those with you. And he kept talking. And when he registered my surprise, then he said, no, those are in the archives. So it's the denial, the brag, and then the withdrawal.
And that's one of the things you get out in the book. And, you know, I've interviewed Donald Trump many times as well. And often you're dealing with these word clouds, word salad that comes up. But there's more method to them than people might think.
One of the things that is so striking about interviewing him, you know this, I know this, is he tends to be very hard to pin down. He's all over the place, and yet he tends to know where certain lines are, and that exchange to me was one of those moments where he started to say something, and it was very hard to know in that moment exactly what that meant. It has much more consequence now since the August 8th FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, but he was all over the place and yet a little careful.
Yeah, it's almost like you can feel something click inside his head when he realizes that a warning sign might be flashing during the interview. Talk about your interview with Trump at Mar-a-Lago after the election. One of the things you write, he seemed very lost.
He seemed shrunken. I don't know how else to describe it. He has become something, at least at the club, of a diminished presence. Now that may change if he's a candidate again, if he's on the campaign trail again. He was the first time I saw him, George, in sales mode. He was trying to sell me on how good the presidency was, how calm he was. He was certainly attacking Joe Biden, but not with the vitriol that we have seen since. The second time I saw him a few weeks later, again at Mar-a-Lago, it was as if he was going backwards. He was talking about this so-called audit of the Arizona results in the election. He was very angry at this person and that person. It was an entirely different demeanor.
Yeah, and he's sort of tripled down on that since the election. That's pretty much all he talks about when he goes out on the stump right now.
It is integral to a 2024 candidacy at the moment, and that was something in our third interview, which was at Bedminster in September last year, that he made clear he would continue to talk about.
You know, and he's talking about running. He's sort of put off the announcement a couple of times right now. I have to tell you, I'm skeptical that he's actually going to follow through with that. Where do you stand on that question?
Catch me on a different day. At the moment, I think he has backed himself into a corner and sort of has to run. I could see a scenario where he doesn't run. I can see a scenario where he announces he's running, stays in for a while, and then gets out. But at the moment, I think it is likelier than not that he runs.
Yeah, that last one does seem quite likely. Sort of announces it and then finds a way to back out at some point. Maggie Haberman, thanks very much. The book is called Confidence Man, and it comes out tomorrow.
Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.